I let the relationship define who I was. There is a particular kind of loss that doesn't announce itself the way grief usually does. It doesn't arrive at a specific moment. It accumulates, slowly, across years, until the day you find yourself sitting in an empty apartment, trying to answer a question as simple as, "What do I actually like to do?" And the silence that answers you is not peaceful. It is the silence of something that has been removed. Something you didn't notice you were losing while you were losing it. I was 24 when I met Gil. I want to be precise about what I was at that moment, because the precision matters. I was not lost. I had interests. I had friendships. I had a way of moving through the world that was recognizably mine. I read certain kinds of books. I had opinions about things I cared about. I had a small but real sense of what I wanted from the next decade of my life. What happened over the following 6 years was not dramatic. That is the first thing to understand. There was no moment when Gil asked me to become someone different. There was no demand, no ultimatum, no obvious pressure. What there was instead was something quieter and more gradual, the slow replacement of my own architecture with one that was shared. In the beginning, this felt like love. You absorb each other. You begin to prefer the same things, or you think you do. You stop going to the places that weren't his places because it is easier to be together than to explain why you want to spend a Saturday morning somewhere he doesn't care about. You stop calling the friends who never quite integrated into the relationship because maintaining those friendships requires a separate social self, and that self is getting harder to access. You start having opinions that are, when you trace them back carefully, his opinions lightly reworked into your own syntax. None of this happens by force. All of it happens by preference, or something that felt like preference at the time. The psychological mechanism operating here has a name. It is called identity fusion, and it is not uncommon in long relationships. What happens is that the boundary between self and partner becomes increasingly porous. Not in a metaphorical sense, in a functional sense. The neural and cognitive structures that maintain a coherent sense of individual self begin to incorporate the partner so thoroughly that distinguishing between what I think and what we think becomes genuinely difficult. The relationship stops being something you are in. It becomes something you are made of. This is distinct from closeness. Closeness is the capacity for deep connection while remaining a discrete person. What I had was different. I was using the relationship as a container, not for love, though there was love, but for identity. For the question, who am I? The answer I had arrived at, without ever consciously deciding this, was, I am the person who is with Gil. The relationship was not a part of my life. It was the architecture of my life. Everything else, work, friendships, interests, decisions about where to live and what to pursue, was arranged around it. And the problem with making any single structure the architecture of your life is that when the structure fails, you do not just lose the structure. You lose the floor. When Gil and I ended, a mutual decision, arrived at slowly, neither of us entirely wrong, I expected to feel grief. I was prepared for grief. What I was not prepared for was the particular disorientation of not knowing what to do on a Tuesday evening, alone, with no one to coordinate around. Not because I was bored. Because I genuinely did not know what I preferred. The question of preference had been routed through the relationship for so long that the independent routing had atrophied. I remember standing in a bookstore about 3 weeks after we separated, trying to choose a book, and realizing I did not know what I liked to read anymore. My reading for years had been shaped by conversations I expected to have with Gil, by what he was reading, by what we were both interested in. Stripped of that context, the shelves in front of me were information without a framework. That moment was small. But it pointed at something large. I had outsourced the construction of my preferences, and I didn't have a self-sufficient version of the infrastructure anymore. The recovery was not a matter of rediscovering a self that had been waiting somewhere, intact, for me to return to it. The self I had before the relationship was 6 years gone. What I had to do instead was construct, slowly, and with considerable awkwardness, a new account of what I was and what I wanted. Not recovered. Built. This took longer than I expected. It required, among other things, the discipline of making choices without consulting anyone. Small choices, deliberately. What to eat. Where to go. What to read. Not because isolation was healthy, but because I needed to practice the experience of my own preferences as they formed, without immediately routing them through another person's response. What I understand now, and what I want to name clearly, is this: a relationship is supposed to be something you have, not something that has you. The distinction sounds simple. It is not simple in practice. Because the fusion I described happens not through carelessness but through love, or what presents itself as love. The impulse to merge, to give yourself over, to stop maintaining the boundary between self and other can feel like depth. Can feel like commitment. Can feel like the proof that you are in something real. But the version of yourself that disappears into a relationship cannot be recovered by the relationship. It can only be recovered by you, separately, with effort, after the fact. And that work is harder than any work you would have done to maintain yourself during. The relationship should orbit around two people who remain themselves. When it becomes the sun that everything orbits around, including the people in it, it has stopped being a relationship and started being an identity replacement. And identity replacements are fragile in exactly the way your own self is not, because they depend on something outside you that can be removed. Here is what I carry forward from this, and what I hope might be useful if you recognize any part of your own story in mine. The pattern I described does not operate because we are careless or unintelligent or unaware. It operates because it has a function, because it is doing something for us that we have not found another way to do. Staying in the wrong situation, staying silent when we should speak, not walking away when the door is right there, all of these behaviors persist because they are solving something, even if imperfectly. They are providing some version of comfort or protection or identity that we have not yet found a better way to provide. Understanding that function is the first move. Not judging the behavior, but asking honestly, what is this doing for me? What would I have to give up if I stopped? What am I afraid will happen if I make the change I know I need to make? Those questions do not dissolve the pattern automatically. But they make it visible in a new way. And visibility changes the relationship to the thing. When you can see what something is doing, you can start to choose whether you want it to keep doing it. The change that followed was not easier because I understood the mechanism. It was the same difficulty. But I went into it knowing what I was moving through rather than being entirely inside it without perspective. That perspective is what I want to pass on here. Not the specific story. The structure. The shape of how we stay in things longer than we should, how we look away from things we can see, how we tell ourselves the thing will change without giving it a mechanism for changing. You are not alone in this. It is not a character flaw. It is how the human nervous system manages uncertainty and fear. But you can do something different. The doing starts with the looking. Look at it. Directly. Honestly. Without the story that makes it easier to carry. And then decide what you want to do with what you see. That decision, fully conscious and fully yours, is the only kind that actually changes anything. There is also something I want to say about the specific moment of turning toward rather than away, the moment when you actually do the thing you have been not doing. Because that moment has a texture that I was not prepared for, and that I think is worth naming so you know what to expect when you reach it. It does not feel like relief. Not at first. The moment of change, of finally having the conversation, or walking away, or saying the thing, or making the decision, often feels worse before it feels better. There is a period of acute discomfort in which the old equilibrium has been disturbed but the new one has not yet settled. You have stopped managing the avoidance, which means the thing you were avoiding is now fully present, no longer softened by distance. That period is real and it is temporary. I want to say both of those things with equal emphasis. It is real, do not be surprised by it, do not mistake it for evidence that you made the wrong choice. And it is temporary, it has a duration, and that duration is almost always shorter than the years of management that preceded it. The other side of that period is different. Not perfect, change does not produce perfection. But different in the specific way of someone who has stopped spending energy on maintaining something and can now spend that energy somewhere else. The ambient cost disappears. The weight that you had normalized as simply the weight of life turns out to have been specific and removable. I have felt that release more than once. Each time it is instructive about how much I had been carrying that I didn't know I was carrying. You probably know what you're carrying. You just haven't decided to put it down yet. When you decide, it will be hard first and better after. That is almost always the order of things. And the better, when it arrives, is real. What I notice now, in the life I have after the story I told here, is a kind of attentiveness I didn't have before. Not anxiety, that's different. Anxiety is looking for the thing that might go wrong. What I have is more like a quiet, ongoing check-in. Am I here because I want to be? Am I saying what I actually think? Am I moving toward what matters or managing around something I haven't named? These questions don't produce constant disruption. Most of the time the answer is, yes, I am where I want to be, saying what I think, moving in the right direction. The check-in confirms what I thought. And that confirmation is itself valuable. It builds a different relationship with my own choices. They feel more like choices and less like things happening to me. On the occasions when the answer is different, when the check-in reveals an avoidance or a suppression or a staying too long, I try to act on the information faster than I used to. Not immediately, not impulsively. But without the elaborate deferral structure. Without the "I'll address this when the conditions are better." The conditions will not be better. They will be different. Different is workable. Better is a fiction. I am the only condition that changes. And I change through the practice of looking and then acting on what I see. That's the whole thing. The looking and the acting. Over and over. For as long as it takes. Which is your whole life. But a whole life spent actually inside it is worth more than a whole life spent at the edge of it, managing the view. I know which one I want. I think you do too.